Are you really serious in selling soybean or selling oil and LNG to China?
Brazil is the top supplier of soybeans to Chinese market right now.
China traditionally was the largest buyer of soybean from the United States. Now, from the Chinese perspective, we need to have second thoughts now about the United States.
They define China as a competitor, and they said we need to outcompete China.
I don't think China and the United States compete at all. Your God for you, my God for me. You will be wiped out if you are stupid enough to launch a nuclear attack on China.
The Taiwan question is always kind of a flashing point.
No country in the world of today, including the United States, will ever have the power or the resources to make sure that Taiwan will be a separate country away from China.
President Trump, he said, China is raping the economy of the US, and you have responded.
No fun at all by anyone in the world raping the United States. The real arrangement is for China and the United States to get along with each other, and we respect each other.
Right now, for the US side, especially when we have some senior government officials, the young generations, they have different understanding about China-US relations. They define China as a competitor, and they define this kind of relationship as a more competitive, and even like in Joe Biden part, and they said we need to outcompete China. But China has never said, so we define this kind of relation as kind of competition. We also have the three principles, like the mutual respect, and also about the win-win situation, and also it's about peaceful coexistence. But for some other observers, they don't buy this kind of idea. They think China and the US as the two biggest economies in the world. They are competing in the high tech, in the semiconductor, in AI, in military, in every part of the world, and they need to force by the two sides to pick sides, or even they need to have some more balanced view. Why can't we compete in this regard?
I don't think China and the United States compete at all. If there is any competition between China and the United States, then I can think of only one real competition. If the United States wants to impose its ideology or political system or values onto China, or if China wants to impose its political system, ideology, or values onto the United States, that will be a real competition. Why? Because the Americans will never accept the Chinese ideology or the Chinese political system. Likewise, China will never accept America's ideology or political system. That's why I've been saying, your God for you, my God for me. Don't try to impose your God on me, and I will never try imposing my God on you. So long as China and the United States follow that philosophy, don't try to impose your God on me, and I will never try to impose my God on you, then there will be no real competition. Now, you mentioned development, relative development, breakthroughs in science, technology, agriculture, etc. Let me be very brief. In terms of the size of the Chinese economy versus the United States, China is already at about 130% that of the United States if we use purchasing power parity. And if you listen to Elon Musk, he keeps saying that the Chinese economy will be double the size of the US economy by the middle of this century. That is the megatrend. Everyone in the United States, everyone in the world need to be ready to accept that megatrend. That is, the Chinese economy will be much larger than the US economy in a matter of, let's say, another 25 years. By the middle of this century, I'm sure the size of the Chinese economy, and measured by official exchange rate, will be doubling the size of the US economy. But does that mean China really competes with the United States? I would say with or without the United States, China will develop. China will need to rise. Because if you look at the Chinese history, let's say 5,000 years of Chinese history, or for example, ever since the Chinese written language came into shape and form about 3,300 years ago, or for example, ever since the first imperial dynasty was founded in Qing dynasty about the 2nd or 3rd century BC, China has always been one of the, if not the largest economy in the world in terms of its historical size. And the Chinese civilization has never been interrupted by any ups and downs in the Chinese political system. So in that sense, We view the peaceful rise of China as something inevitable. We view Chinese history for 5,000 years as a continuous kind of linear or cyclical development, not to be interrupted by any force in the world. And we expect to live for another 5,000 years to come. And whether the United States will still be there 5,000 years later or not, that's another issue. I do not want to speculate about that. But I think for China, we look at China-US relations as the very or the most important bilateral relations, but we do not want to compete with the United States. Let me give you an example. I would never urge the Chinese men's basketball to compete with the American men's basketball team. Why? Because I think China will never win over the American men's basketball team. But for women's diving, no, I don't think the Americans really want to compete with stars like Quan Hongchan, etc. They will not really win because the Chinese women's divers are truly the best in the world. So both China and the United States, we have strengths and weaknesses. You have superiorities on some side, I have superiorities on the other side. For China and the United States, getting along and really cooperate with each other will be the best strategy and the best recipe for China and for the United States and for mankind. If China and the United States really compete in quotation marks, it's not going to work. Now, you mentioned science and technology. Let's use the chips war launched by the United States as an example. Let me put this on the record. The chips war strategy will end up in complete failure by the United States. Why? Because China used to spend more than $400 billion buying chips from the United States, from Japan, from Republic of Korea, from China's Taiwan province, you name it. The United States want to squeeze China, want to deny China's access to advanced chips. But did China crumble? Did China collapse? No. This forced China to really go into self-reliance and independence. So I think in a matter of 3 to 5 years, China will achieve complete self-independence and self-reliance in chips production. That means China will no longer need to buy chips from abroad in any meaningful sense. And then, even more amazingly, China will be a very important exporter of chips. China already is one of the largest exporters of chips today, but it's mostly on the lower end, medium end. But going forward, China will be the largest exporter of chips, lower end, medium end, and the high end. And that will completely change the dynamics of how this semiconductor industry will be structured in the world. So be prepared. The maximum pressure levied by the United States government against China, try to deny China's access to semiconductor chips, will end in U.S. complete failure in this chips war. And China will emerge as the real winner of this chips war.
We know now in Washington, D.C., there is a very mixed atmosphere about China. Some people say, we would like to push some kind of political agenda for his election. Like, for example, some congressmen, they would like to win the support from their this district. They get the more support by saying some Asian China rhetorics or whatever. And some people, they have some fundraisers that they ask them to do so. But some people, they were kind of driven by like anxious. They think the rise of China is too quick. And if we cannot stop China right now, maybe China will replace the US someday. And maybe even for some think tanks research fellow, they think China has a long march plan. Like the ultimate goal is to replace the US and to destroy US soft power. Do you agree on this point?
Why should China replace the United States? My vision of the world and the future of the world will always involve China as a very important member of the international community and the United States also as a very important member. China and the United States can work together, can complement with each other, and can support each other to achieve miracles. I think President Trump said one thing, which I completely agree. He said, if China and the United States can really put our heads together, there will be nothing we cannot overcome. This is truly a very truthful statement by President Trump, and I completely endorse him. Now, the world will never be a unipolar world. As a matter of fact, the international order established back in 1945 upon the ashes of the Second World War, both in the European theater and in the Asian Pacific theater, was not meant to be an unipolar world to start with, because at that time the United Nations came into existence, and the very important body within the United Nations was the Security Council. There was a Security Council body called the 5 permanent member states, each with a veto power. This was actually the foundation of the envisioned post-Second World War international security order, meaning the permanent members of the Security Council of the United Nations should not really go to war against each other, as what happened in the Second World War and before then in the First World War. I think the United Nations managed to achieve this goal of preventing the outbreak of another world war. So when we look at 1945, when we look at the United Nations Security Council, 5 permanent member states, each with a veto power, it was not meant to be a unipolar world. Something happened after the end of the Cold War. People or Washington believed it was the only surviving superpower. It wanted to be the unipolar in the world. It wanted to impose its vision onto other countries. But that, in reality, was in violation of the multipolarity of the world order established back in 1945. From China's perspective, we want to continue with the international security order established in 1945, rather than try to destroy the international security order established in 1945. If the United States really remained true to whatever they committed to in 1945, there should be no real fundamental difference between China and the United States. We could work together, we could help each other, we could be friends with each other, partners with each other, rather than, for example, get into each other's jugular. I want to make one very simple point. War should not be an option between China and the United States. War should never be considered as an option. Why? Because in terms of conventional weapons, I truly believe the United States and China are completely on a par with each other. And in order not to make our American friends unhappy, I would say China does not have superiority over the Americans, neither does the United States have a superiority over China in terms of conventional weapons. Now, in terms of nuclear weapons, the United States has much more warheads. They can destroy the world 1,000 times. But China has warheads, and China's philosophy is very simple and very elegant. If anyone imposes nuclear war on China, China will have enough warheads to destroy you and completely wipe you out. So, in terms of nuclear war, China and the United States are locked up together. You cannot launch a war against China because you will be wiped out if you are stupid enough to launch a nuclear attack on China. So I think war should not be an option at all. We should get along with each other and solve whatever problems there are between China and the United States in peaceful way.